in the high desert of northern New Mexico, sits a town known for its artistic soul and ancient adobe structures. But underneath, the charm lies a maddening secret that has plagued residents for decades. It is a sound that supposedly does not exist, yet it drives men and women to the brink of insanity with its relentless drone. Imagine a diesel engine idling just outside your window, or a generator humming in the distance. But when you go to look, there is nothing there but the vast, empty desert. This is the story of the Taos, a phenomenon that defies scientific explanation and lurks in the quietest hours of the night. It is a noise that permeates walls and pillows, and skulls refusing to let its victims sleep. For those who hear it, the hum is not a curiosity. It is a psychological torture device that never turns off. Taos is a place of stark beauty, where the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rise majestically against a sky that seems too blue to be real. The air is thin and crisp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and piñon pine across the rolling mesas. For centuries, the Tiwa people have inhabited the Taos Pueblo, living in harmony with the land and its spirits. Artists and writers flocked here in the 20th century, seeking inspiration in the light and shadow of the high desert. But for a select few, the silence of the desert is a lie. For the 2% of the population, known as hearers, the scenic beauty is a prison of sound. The geography itself seems to trap the noise, amplifying a low-frequency vibration that resonates deep within the inner ear, making escape impossible within the town limits. The history of the region is steeped in blood and mystery, dating back to the Spanish conquest and the Pueblo Revolt. The land holds the memories of ancient battles and spiritual ceremonies that occurred long before modern acoustic equipment existed. Some locals believe the hum is not a mechanical noise, but the earth itself groaning under the weight of history. They whisper that the dormant volcanic field beneath the Rio Grande Rift is awakening, or that the spirits of the ancestors are restless. These legends add a layer of supernatural dread to the phenomenon, turning a scientific anomaly into a ghost story. The hum is described as invasive and predatory, seemingly seeking out specific individuals while leaving their neighbors in blissful silence, creating isolation and paranoia. Elias Thorne was a man who came to Taos to escape the cacophony of the modern world and find peace in the solitude of the desert. He was a retired audio engineer from Chicago who had spent his life surrounded by the noise of the city and the technical buzz of recording studios. He purchased a small adobe casita on the outskirts of town, far away from the main roads and power lines. Elias believed he had found paradise in the sweeping vistas and the absolute stillness of the New Mexico nights. He spent his first week sitting on his porch, watching the stars and reveling in the quiet that he had craved for so long. He did not know that the silence was waiting to betray him. It started on a Tuesday night in late autumn when the temperature dropped and the wind died down to a complete stillness. Elias woke up at 3 in the morning with a strange sensation of pressure in his head and ears. He sat up in bed listening, intently assuming a car was idling in his driveway or a truck was passing on the distant highway. The sound was a low and steady thrumming that felt more like a vibration than an audible tone. He got out of bed and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness, expecting to see headlights or a running engine. The desert was empty and bathed in the pale light of a gibbous moon. There was no source for the sound, yet it persisted. He checked the refrigerator and the water heater, and even flipped the main breaker to his house to cut all power. The silence of the house was absolute in terms of electrical hums, but the noise in his head remained constant. It was a droning sound, around 60 hertz, that seemed to emanate from the walls and the floor. Elias stepped outside into the cold night air, hoping the open space would dissipate the noise. Instead, the hum seemed to encompass the entire horizon, coming from everywhere and nowhere, all at once. It was the sound of a massive unseen machine operating just beyond the veil of perception. Elias stood in his pajamas, shivering not from the cold, but from the sudden realization that the silence was gone. Over the next few weeks, the noise began to take a toll on his physical and mental health. Sleep became a battleground where the hum was the victorious conqueror, night after night. Elias bought earplugs of every variety, from foam inserts to industrial-grade earmuffs used at shooting ranges. To his horror, the soundproofing measures only seemed to make the hum louder. By blocking out the external high-frequency ambient noise, the low-frequency drone became the only thing his brain could focus on. It resonated in his skull and vibrated in his chest cavity. He began to look haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a tremor in his hands. The paradise he sought had become a torture chamber. Elias was not a man to give in to superstition, so he approached the problem with the logic of an audio engineer. He unpacked his old recording equipment, including sensitive omnidirectional microphones and frequency analyzers. He set up a listening station in his living room, determined to capture the sound and prove its existence. He spent hours staring at the dancing lines on his oscilloscope, waiting for a spike in the low frequency range. The equipment picked up the wind and the distant cry of coyotes and the settling of the house, but it did not pick up the hum. The needles remained flat in the range he was hearing. The sound was loud enough to keep him awake, but too elusive for his machines to record. Desperation drove Elias to the town of Taos, seeking answers from the local residents and medical professionals. He visited the local clinic complaining of tinnitus, but the audiologist told him his hearing was perfect. The doctor hesitated before handing him a pamphlet that simply said the Taos hum. Elias read the brochure in the waiting room, realizing he was not the only one suffering from this affliction. The pamphlet described the exact symptoms he was experiencing, including the pressure in the ears and the insomnia. It mentioned a study conducted by the University of New Mexico and the impossibility of locating a source. Elias realized he had joined a club that no one wanted to be a part of. He attended a meeting of the hearers, a support group that gathered in the basement of a community center. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, including artists and mechanics and retirees. They sat in a circle, looking exhausted and anxious, sharing their stories of the noise that never stopped. One woman claimed it was a secret military project, communicating with submarines using extremely low frequency waves. Another man insisted it was aliens signaling from underground bases beneath the Archuleta Mesa. The theories ranged from the plausible to the paranoid, but the fear in their eyes was uniform. They were victims of an invisible assailant that the rest of the world refused to acknowledge. Among the group was a woman named Sarah, who had lived in Taos for 20 years and had heard the hum for 10 of them. She told Elias that the noise had a consciousness and that it fed on the attention you gave it. She warned him that trying to find the source was a dangerous path that would lead only to madness. Sarah described how her husband had become obsessed with the hum, spending his nights digging in their backyard, looking for buried generators. He eventually packed his bags and left without a word, unable to tolerate the vibration any longer. Her warning chilled Elias, but his scientific mind could not accept a supernatural explanation. He needed to find the source. Elias decided to map the hum by driving around the county and marking the intensity of the sound on a topographic map. He spent his nights navigating the dark backroads of Taos County, stopping every mile to listen. He discovered that the sound was not uniform across the landscape, but had pockets of high intensity. It seemed loudest near the Rio Grande Gorge, where the earth was split open by a massive rift valley. Standing on the edge of the gorge at midnight, the sound was deafening to him, like a choir of diesel engines roaring from the depths. He felt the vibration in the soles of his boots and in the fillings of his teeth. The source had to be down there. The Rio Grande Gorge is a formidable geological feature, a jagged tier in the volcanic plateau that drops hundreds of feet to the river below. It is a place of rugged beauty and danger, where the dark basalt rocks absorb the heat of the sun. Elias began to hike into the gorge during the day, looking for vents or caves or machinery. He found nothing but lizards and cactus and the rushing water of the river. But at night, the gorge transformed into a resonator, amplifying the low frequencies rising from the earth. he started sleeping in his truck near the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge, unable to return to his silent house, where the hum felt more confined and oppressive. His obsession began to alienate him from the few friends he had made, and he stopped attending the support group meetings. He spent his savings on more advanced equipment, including geophones designed to detect seismic vibrations. He buried sensors in the ground around his property and linked them to a computer system that ran 24 hours a day. The data showed minor tremors and microseisms typical of a volcanic region, but nothing that correlated with the constant drone he heard. The disconnect between his sensory experience and the empirical data was fracturing his reality. He began to suspect that the sound was bypassing his ears and interacting directly with his nervous system. One night, while reviewing the seismic data, Elias noticed a pattern that he had missed before. There were rhythmic pulses in the background noise that matched the beat of a human heart, but much slower. It was as if something massive was breathing beneath the surface of the desert. The pulses occurred every few minutes, sending a subtle wave of energy through the bedrock. Elias became convinced that he was listening to a living organism of colossal size. The government experiments and industrial machinery theories vanished from his mind. He believed he had discovered the heartbeat of the earth, or something ancient sleeping within it. Elias took his findings to Sarah, hoping she would understand his breakthrough regarding the rhythmic pulses. She looked at him with pity and fear, seeing the manic gleam in his bloodshot eyes. She told him that the hum changes to fit the fears of the listener, and that he was projecting his own biology onto the noise. She begged him to leave Taos and move to the coast where the ocean waves would mask the sound. She told him that the hum was a siren's song that would lure him into the desert and never let him go. Elias grew angry at her dismissal, accusing her of being afraid of the truth. He stormed out of her house determined to prove her wrong. He returned to the Rio Grande Gorge, equipped with climbing gear and powerful flashlights, intent on descending to the river bottom at night. The wind howled through the canyon, mixing with the hum to create a disorienting symphony of noise. As he descended the steep trail, the shadows seemed to stretch and move in the periphery of his vision. The basalt rocks loomed over him like ancient sentinels guarding a forbidden gate. The hum grew louder with every step down, descending into the earth. It was no longer just a sound, but a physical pressure that pushed against his chest and made it hard to breathe. At the bottom of the gorge, the river was a ribbon of black oil reflecting the starlight. Elias set up his equipment on a flat rock near the water, aiming his directional microphones at the canyon walls. He put on his headphones and turned up the gain, expecting to hear the roar of the hidden source. Instead, he heard a voice. It was not a human voice, speaking a recognizable language, but a series of guttural tones and whispers. It sounded like a chant or a prayer recited by hundreds of voices in unison. Elias tore the headphones off in terror, staring into the darkness. The sound continued, without the amplification echoing off the canyon walls. He scrambled back up the trail in a panic, slipping on loose rocks and tearing his clothes on the sharp brush. The hum was pursuing him, rising in pitch and intensity, as if angry that he had intruded. He felt a presence behind him, a cold breath on his neck that had nothing to do with the wind. He reached the rim of the gorge, gasping for air, and threw his equipment into the back of his truck. He drove back to his casita at unsafe speeds, constantly checking the rearview mirror. The desert landscape, which had once looked peaceful now, seemed hostile and alien. The sagebrush looked like grasping claws in the headlights. Back in the safety of his home, Elias barricaded the doors and covered the windows with heavy blankets. He turned on every light in the house, trying to banish the shadows. But the hum was inside with him, resonating in the adobe walls. He could hear the chanting, now low and rhythmic, beneath the mechanical drone. It was calling his name, or at least he thought it was. The sleep deprivation had broken down the barriers between reality and hallucination. He huddled in the corner of his living room, holding a kitchen knife, waiting for the source of the sound to reveal itself. Days turned into a blur of gray exhaustion and terror as Elias refused to sleep or leave the house. He stopped eating and drank only tap water, his eyes fixed on the walls. He began to write on the walls with a black marker, transcribing the sounds he heard into jagged lines and frantic words. The writing covered the plaster in a chaotic mural of madness. He wrote about the sleepers beneath the earth and the vibration that unlocks the mind. He wrote about the frequency that dissolves bone and the song that ends the world. His handwriting deteriorated from legible script to violent scratches. Sarah grew worried when Elias did not answer his phone for 3 days and decided to drive out to his casita. She found the gate unlocked and the front door standing wide open, swaying in the desert breeze. The house was dark and silent except for the buzzing of a few flies. She called out his name, but there was no answer. She stepped inside and saw the writing on the walls, covering every inch of the living room. It was a manifesto of a mind unraveling. In the center of the room lay his recording equipment smashed to pieces, as if he had tried to kill the machine that failed him. She searched the house, finding no sign of Elias. But she did find his truck parked out back with the keys in the ignition. His wallet and phone were on the kitchen counter. It was as if he had simply walked away into the desert. Sarah felt the familiar pressure in her ears, the hum asserting its presence in the empty house. She felt a sudden urge to leave, to run away from this place that had consumed her friend. She backed out of the house and drove away, vowing never to return to that specific spot. She knew deep down that Elias had gone to the gorge. The sheriff department organized a search party for Elias Thorne, covering the area around his home and the nearby mesa. They used tracking dogs and a helicopter to scour the landscape. The dogs picked up his scent, leading away from the house and towards the Rio Grande Gorge. The trail was erratic, moving in circles and zigzags, suggesting a man who was disoriented or being chased. The tracks ended abruptly at the edge of the gorge near the bridge. There were no signs of a struggle or a fall. It was as if he had vanished into the thin air or merged with the rock. Divers were sent into the Rio Grande River to search for a body, but the currents were strong and the visibility was poor. They found nothing but driftwood and debris. The official report listed Elias as a missing person, likely lost in the wilderness due to a mental health crisis. The local newspaper ran a small story about the disappearance, mentioning his struggle with the hum. To the general public, it was a sad story of a man who lost his way. To the hearers, it was a confirmation of their worst fears. The hum had claimed another victim. Months later, a group of hikers in the gorge found a digital audio recorder wedged in a crevice near the water. It was battered and weather-worn, but the memory card was still intact. They turned it over to the sheriff, who listened to the final file recorded on the device. The recording was mostly static and wind noise, but near the end, there was a distinct sound. It was Elias breathing heavily, whispering about the opening in the rock. Then there was a sound that defied description, a resonant chord that seemed to vibrate the speaker of the computer. Then silence. The audio file was analyzed by experts, but they could not identify the source of the anomalous sound. It contained frequencies far below the range of human hearing and complex harmonics that suggested an artificial origin. Some speculated it was a recording of a tectonic event, while others believed it was a hoax. The file was never released to the public, buried in an evidence locker in the county courthouse. But rumors of its content spread through the town, adding to the legend of the Taos hum. People whispered that Elias had found the source and that it had taken him. The casita where Elias lived stood empty for years, the writing on the walls fading under layers of dust. Real estate agents tried to sell it, but prospective buyers always complained of an uneasy feeling. They said the house felt heavy, as if the air was thicker than it should be. Eventually, the property was taken off the market and left to the elements. The adobe began to crack and crumble, returning to the earth from which it was made. The windows broke and the roof sagged, but the silence inside was never truly silent. The Taos hum continues to be reported by residents and visitors, alike a persistent mystery that refuses to be solved. Scientists still visit with their magnetometers and acoustic arrays, measuring the electromagnetic fields and the background noise. They publish papers about acoustic gravity waves and autocaustic emissions, offering rational explanations for the irrational. But they never stay long enough to let the sound burrow into their minds. They leave with their data satisfied that they have categorized the phenomenon. They do not understand that the hum is not just a sound. Newcomers still arrive in Taos, drawn by the light, and the art, unaware of the low-frequency predator that waits for them. They buy houses with views of the mountains and settle in for a life of peace. Then one night, the silence breaks. They check the refrigerator. They look for a truck idling outside. They ask their neighbors if they hear a generator. And slowly, the realization dawns on them. The look of confusion turns to fear, and then to resignation. They have become hearers, and the desert will never be quiet again. Some say that on quiet nights near the Rio Grande Gorge, if you listen past the wind and the river, you can hear a human voice joined with the drone. It is a faint whisper, trapped in the geological resonance of the rift. They say it is Elias Thorne, still trying to explain what he found in the dark. The hum persists, a constant reminder that there are things in this world that science cannot explain, and that the earth holds secrets it is not willing to share. The vibration continues in the bones of the land, eternal and maddening. The mystery of the Taos hum serves as a grim reminder of the limits of human perception. We build our world on what we can see and touch, but there are forces that operate beyond our senses. The hum is a phantom that haunts the auditory cortex, a ghost that lives in the frequency spectrum. It is a story without an ending, a question without an answer. As long as the desert winds blow and the earth shifts on its axis, the hum will be there waiting for the next listener to tune in. Walk through the plaza of Taos on a winter evening, and you will see them, the people who stop and tilt their heads, listening to something you cannot hear. You will see the exhaustion in their faces and the desperate look in their eyes. They are the haunted ones, the witnesses to the invisible. Do not ask them what they hear unless you are prepared to share their burden. Ignorance is a blessing when the alternative is a sound that never ends. The hum is not just a noise in New Mexico. It is a signal that we are not alone in our own heads. The legend of the hum has become part of the fabric of New Mexico folklore, sitting alongside the skinwalkers and the weeping woman. It is a modern horror story born from the collision of geology and psychology. It reminds us that madness is a quiet thing that arrives not with a scream, but with a hum that starts low and soft and grows until it fills the entire world. So if you ever find yourself in the high desert, enjoying the profound silence, be careful. If you listen too closely, the silence might just start listening back. And once you hear it, you can never unhear it. It becomes the soundtrack to your life, the background radiation of your existence. You will search for the source, and you will fail. You will try to escape, and you will find that the sound follows you, because the Taos hum is not out there in the desert. It is in the wires of your nervous system, in the architecture of your brain. It is the sound of the void, and it is calling for you. Sleep well, and pray that the silence holds